If you watch the debates, periodically Ron Paul would say, you know what the problem is? Government. Get rid of government, and liberty will sweep in its place. You just get rid of the government, and we're going to have freedom, which sounds great. I was in East Africa on Monday, and let me tell you something. There are a bunch of places there in East Africa where they don't have government. You know what's swept into those places? Not liberty. Okay? It's not freedom. It's bad. Okay? Furthermore, nature abhors a vacuum. All of you have heard that, right? Same is true with politics. If you don't have government there, the most powerful person, the most powerful enterprise is able to go in, and there's nobody to counterbalance it for the average person. Does this mean we should have big government, wasteful government, stupid government, government like we've got in Washington where it's corrupt government, government where we got in Washington where 90 or 70% of the members of Congress don't even have passports, don't know what's going on overseas, don't know what a derivative is? No, that's not what we want, but that's not the only option. You could have effective government. You could have lean government. You can have smart government. You don't, if you're in a business and all of a sudden some part of the business isn't working, you don't say, okay, well, let's just shut that down. You say, how do I fix it? And that's where we are now. Part of the system is broken, the political part, the money part. Part of the system is broken, the political part in Congress. Part of the system is broken because the top is benefiting so much more than the bottom in an unprecedented level. Last year was the first year of recovery in the United States. Of the benefits of that recovery, 93% went to the top 1% of the population. Okay? In the United States, the 450 richest Americans have more net worth than the bottom 150 million Americans. System's broken. 1,000 richest people in the world have more net worth than the bottom couple of billion people in the world. Okay? So you talk about civic engagement, which is a great thing for everybody to talk about. It's not just important, it's urgent. Because if you don't get involved, if you don't figure out how you use that technology, if you don't figure out what's going wrong, if you think this is all just a bunch of bullshit that somebody is passing down on you, it's going to bite you in the ass. Sorry to use colorful language. No, this is a sensitive place. You got to pay attention. You got to get involved. It's not working. And if you don't get involved, who have the benefits of good education, and you don't get involved and you don't start to fix it, it's going to fix itself. There are other countries out there. We thought at the end of the Cold War, American capitalism won, Soviet communism had lost. We're wrong. We are now in a new kind of competition. You've got Chinese capitalism, European capitalism, democratic development capitalism in Brazil and India, small state entrepreneurial capitalism in Singapore and Israel and the United Arab Emirates and in Chile. You've got lots of solutions out there. And they're easy to dismiss. I mean, Mitt Romney, something bad happened to that guy in France. He went on a mission to France. And now you listen to him talk about Europe, it's like the worst word he can think of. He said, oh, well, we don't want to be like Europe. Okay, well, there's some bad stuff happening in Southern Europe. But I'll tell you something. In Northern Europe, if you look at the rankings of quality of life, which is not an unimportant thing, Northern European countries are sort of on the top of the rankings. If you look at the rankings of educational achievement, they're kind of in the top. We're not, by the way, in either one of those things. We're in the middle on education. If you look at the rankings on health care, quality of health care provision, they're at the top. Now, you might say, oh, well, that's those big spending Europeans, and that just goes and proves the case. They're also at the top of the rankings of fiscal responsibility, which we are not. There are a lot of other people out there who have a say in what the shape of capitalism is going to be, where the capital is going to be, who's going to make the decisions of the world. It's been the United States for the past 100 years, or it's certainly been the United States for the past 50 years. It's not a foregone conclusion. We are not given leadership by divine right. There are other people out there with other systems that are working for them, and all of those systems, except ours, assume a different kind of bigger role for government. Some of them are wrong. Some of them are downright crazy. But the economic center of gravity is moving to Asia. Typically when that happens in history, the intellectual center of gravity moves. And what that means is that it's going to be tougher for us to lead. And we can't be complacent as we do it. And it's not going to be done for us. And that gets us back to the hard work. Ultimately, each of us, as individuals, have to engage and do the hard work and do it every day, or we are going to continue heading down this path. And the problems of America are going to be solved by social unrest and our own Tahrir squares in the course of the next couple of decades, instead of constructively and in real dialogue and in serious conversations where we're really looking for solutions and we're not name-calling and we're not part of the food fight. I'm happy to answer your questions.
I want to start first. This occurred to me last night in the Russian presidential election, surprisingly won by Mr. Putin. One of the serious candidates for president of Russia, you have to think about this, is a billionaire. He also is the owner of the New Jersey Nets. Our world has changed. Secondly, this is a story about David Rubin, Robert Rubin. When he was Secretary of the Treasury, he goes to Goldman Sachs, correct?
Came from Goldman Sachs.
Goldman Sachs, but he goes back to Wall Street. He sits in a meeting where they're discussing derivatives, and he walks out of the meeting and he says, I don't know what they're talking about. Third, Glass-Steagall, passed in 1934, was 8 pages. Dodd-Frank was 2,000 pages. So how do we fix that kind of thing?
Well, fewer pages sounds like a good answer to me. I mean, you know, the reality is this is part of special bidding. What happens is if you've got a lot of people and they're coming up to a congressman and they're saying, well, look, I need a little change like this, or I need a little change like that. And that's what makes bills fat. You know what makes you fat? You eat too much and you don't work out enough. What makes a bill fat is when a lobbyist comes up and says, add this little slice for me, add this little slice for me. And you can't have that. And it also, when you see a big, thick bill, it's a technique to hide things that are hard for people to swallow. And so I think, people have got to push back on the system. They got to read the bills. But I do think you get to another point, which I made earlier, which, Rubin talked about it, and that is things have reached a level of complexity where most people don't actually understand what's going on. And yet they accept that. What they should do, whenever you're in a meeting and somebody says something that you don't understand, the thing that you ought to do is say, stop. Let's roll back the tape. Please explain this to me in language I can understand. I'm not too bright. It's okay. It is better to ask what's wrong and seek to understand it than it is to walk out of the room like Robert Rubin did and say, I don't understand derivatives, but I'm going to repeal Glass-Steagall. Because that leads to problems.
Nancy Gardner, and then we'll...
Actually, I have a couple of comments and a question, if I may. I want to speak to the Dodd-Frank Act. As a mortgage broker, I know this very well. I live with it daily. The plan, obviously, they're letting Wall Street go with no oversight. The oversight, however, is on the mortgage brokers and the process of getting people into their homes, getting people refinanced. That process wasn't broken nearly like Wall Street was. The what it looks like is what you were saying earlier, that things are going to the big banks, those that have the money. They're setting up the system so that those of us that want to refi, want to buy a house, want financing for businesses, any of that, that we are eventually going to be forced to go only to the big banks. They'll only be the ones in business in order that will give out, that will be able to give money to those of us who need it. They are eliminating the competition so that when somebody goes to a bank, they're stuck because their credit report, their appraisal, everything is owned by that bank. And they won't be able to go around and find the competition that they need for good loan pricing, good loan programs, etc. I do want to talk about...
Because also concentrate power in any big institution, you also enhance risk.
Yes.
There's one big bank that is right now approaching 16% of GDP in size. Of all the banks in the United States, the bank that was most vulnerable to European collapse was that bank, the Bank of America, 16% of US GDP.
Yeah, and it's interesting that big banks in the world own our Federal Reserve. We, the citizens, do not. But the comment that I wanted to say is, it has been said now that this is the first time since the Great Depression that more people are taking from the system, get benefits, than pay into the system. My question, and that's a throwaway, my question is relating to something you didn't talk about but George had in your bio. And you were talking about big business and climate change and that type of battle. I want to ask you about cap and trade, because cap and trade, taken to the big business, if you take it from the big business side, they're going to be forming a commodities market to sell the commodities of carbon units. We then, eventually that could get to the point where we have to buy carbon units to breathe out, so to speak. I know that's taking it to the extreme, but that when we have to get certain light bulbs that give out a certain amount of carbon, the trees and the plants still need carbon to give us oxygen. Would you like to talk about the big business danger that is coming?
Well, I don't.
In 2013.
Okay, look. Let me say a couple things. First of all, one of the reasons that's in my bio is I have 4 jobs. This is a part of what's wrong with America, is that I've got to work 4 jobs. In fact, to me, that's the biggest thing that's wrong with America, but that's a little bit of a self-serving view. So I'm a visiting scholar at the Carnegie Endowment, and I write books. I'm the CEO of Foreign Policy magazine, the FP Group, which is part of the Washington Post company. But I'm also the CEO of a company called Garten Rothkopf, which is a company that does climate and energy related consulting work. And so we are constantly immersed in this issue. And if you'd asked me a question about cap and trade 2 years ago, I would say you really ought to study that because that could happen. It's not going to happen. Washington is not going to do anything that looks like cap and trade anytime soon. Will they and should they put a price on carbon somehow? Yes, they will, and yes, they should. Although the approach they're going to take will not look like cap and trade. It may look much more like some kind of a gas tax or something like that. Why should they? Because you produce too much carbon, you heat up the atmosphere. If you heat up the atmosphere, everybody who's got beachfront property here has got a problem. People who are across the street, by the way, may have a great opportunity. You have to plan your things, plan things accordingly. Having said that, there's just no political will at all. It has become a toxic issue in Washington. It has been politicized